Chapter 12. Poetry, Music, and Dance. How good is man's life, the mere living, how fit to employ all the heart and the soul and the senses, forever enjoy. Emily was coming home from the Browning class. It was a boisterous night. Snow blew into her face as she walked across the slough, her body bent and braced to meet the wind. She didn't feel cold. She felt exhilarated to the ends of her mittened fingers. The richness of Saul warmed her like a fire. No wonder Don loves Browning. But she amended that thought. No, it's surprising. Don hasn't the joy in life, and the faith in people, and the love of God that Browning has. Or has he? Maybe I don't understand Don. She struggled up the snowy path to her door. I'm going to talk with him when he comes home for Christmas, she resolved, stamping her feet at the threshold. It was silly to let him ignore her when they had so much in common. Going into the silent house, she laughed suddenly. I'm not as humble as I used to be. But who could be humble studying Browning? He makes you feel important just because you're a human being. The Browning class had met only twice, but it had already changed the color of Emily's winter. Miss Fowler had stressed her conviction that Browning was not a poet for the cultured few. It was true, she said, that he wasn't easy reading. You had to keep your dictionaries and reference books handy, but he was vital, red-blooded, with a deep interest in all human problems. He gave supreme importance to the battle between right and wrong. I count life just a stuff to try the soul's strength on, Miss Fowler quoted, and Emily felt it a tonic. She was braced, too, by the reference in Dr. Richard Burton's introduction to Browning's schooling, which had been irregular, ending with a single term at London University. But his education then was just beginning and was to last through a long lifetime of eager, wide, and absorptive culture until death itself. Emily wrote down that phrase. Eager, wide, and absorptive culture. That's what I'm going to try for, she thought. She was absorbing culture in Miss Fowler's apartment, absorbing it with every pore. Miss Fowler had, indeed, seen the originals of the pictures on her walls. When they discussed the life of Browning and his invalid poetess wife in Florence, Italy, she brought out a great stack of postcards collected during a European sojourn. There were pictures not only of Italy, but of Switzerland, the German cities, Paris, the British Isles. And even more important than Browning and the postcards was the talk besides Miss Fowler's fire. The group of women included, besides Emily and Alice, Miss Sparrow the librarian, two young teachers, and a young married woman named Mrs. Jack Delaney, who was a graduate of Smith. Their talk ranged over a wide field. Women's suffrage, Mrs. Pankhurst and Christabel were both in prison that winter. President-elect Woodrow Wilson, Henry George, Ibsen, Tolstoy, George Bernard Shaw. Miss Fowler loaned Emily Man and Superman. They talked about the New York plays. Mrs. Delaney went to New York often. They talked about music, about opera. Miss Fowler had heard Wagner's Ring in Bayreuth, Germany. Emily found she had much to think about as she shoveled high-walled paths through December snows, chopped wood for the kitchen range, and tended the coal stove. This sat on its zinc pad like a fat, insatiable monster. She shared with her grandfather the work of shaking it down and filling it with coal and taking out the ashes. The red glow beside its isinglass windows was pleasant, but it spread dust unmercifully, making housework harder. Ruefully, Emily rubbed cream into her chapped hands at night. She was extremely busy. Planted seeds produce a garden that requires tending, and all her desperate efforts to find self-expression were sprouting into demanding growths. Dancing lessons took only an hour a week, but piano lessons must be practiced, and Browning and Lincoln took time. Mrs. Delaney entertained the group at Sunday night supper, and they made a pleasant plan to go to plays at the Opera House together. Deep Valley was conveniently located between the Twin Cities and Omaha, and a good theatrical production stopped there now and then. Moreover, quite unexpectedly in mid-December, Cab invited her to another dance. "Why the dickens don't you have a phone put in?" he accosted her when they met on Front Street. "It's a long way across your slough. Do your beaux write notes of invitation and wait for an answer? You've got a lot of confidence, girl." Emily laughed, shy but pleased, and Cab proceeded. "It's the Elks Club again. Same crowd as before, if you had fun last time." "I did. Will you come then, next Saturday night?" She wore the corn-colored silk again, and again she had a very good time. In the first place, her dancing had improved. "Gee whiz, I must be quite a teacher!" Cab exclaimed after they had circled the room. She danced with zestful accuracy through a program of waltzes, two-steps, schottisches, polkas. There was no chance to try out her Gabby Glide. The Elks Club was too conservative for that. No wonder the girls are so crazy about dances, Emily thought. They're fun. She had just finished a lively polka with Jack Delaney when she saw Mr. Wakeman. The big young man was standing alone, his hands thrust casually into his pockets, surveying the room with a smile. His gaze reached her just as Jack Delaney took her to her chair, where Cab was waiting. She saw him look at her with a puzzled expression, and then he came forward. "Good evening, Miss Emily," he said in his soft Southern voice. "I didn't recognize you for a moment. I've been waiting to see you, to hear what you thought of the St. John game." "I didn't go," Emily replied. "You didn't go? After the way you pumped for it? Whatever happened?" "Say you sprained your ankle," Cab joked. But Emily only smiled. "Can't I have a dance and get at the truth of the matter?" He took her card, but it was full. "Next time, then," he said. "Remember, I'm going to find out." His brown eyes smiled down at her. He bowed and turned away. "He's a nice guy," remarked Cab. "The team certainly likes him," Emily answered. Her own feelings were mixed. He was associated in her mind with that awful high school girl in a hair ribbon remark. But if he hadn't made her angry that day, she wouldn't have put up her hair. She wouldn't be here. Cab laughed. "The team's crazy about him. It took them a while to figure him out, though. He's so easygoing and speaks so soft. The team thought at first that maybe he was soft. At practice one day he was saying, 'Get down when you charge. Keep low. Hit hard.' And the right guard on the first team, a big, strong, smart aleck, said, 'Maybe you'd play guard on the scrubs and give me the idea, Mr. Wakeman.'" Wake looked them all over and smiled that slow, easy smile of his and said, "Sure, if you think that'd help." And he got down in the scrub line, but before he did, he told the quarterback to send the next play through him. I doubt if he put out more than half his strength, but he certainly hit hard enough to knock Mr. Smart Aleck flat. The scrubs picked up 20 yards. When Wake came back, the first team guard was just getting up. Did that give you the idea? Wake asked with that big easy smile. Or shall we try it again? The big kid grinned and said, Nope, we won't try that again. Not ever, Mr. Wakeman. I got the idea completely. Emily laughed, well able to visualize the scene. The next day she bought a new party dress, just in case she should be invited to the Christmas dances. She didn't want to have Miss Mix make it, for then Aunt Sophie would know that she had hoped to be invited, and of course she had never been in the past. But things were going to be so different. She found a beautiful gown, a patterned white tunic over pale blue silk with a spray of blue silk cornflowers embroidered on the bodice. You ought to wear blue cornflowers in your hair, said the saleswoman. It would be good because your eyes are so blue. I will, Emily thought, and I'll wear those old pearl earrings from the jewel box. They were just the lustrous shade of her tunic. It was almost time for the Christmas college visitation. Front Street was putting on evergreen and holly. The store windows were glowing with gifts, and the sleigh bells ringing along snow-packed roads had a holiday chime. In the little house across the slough there were holidayish things to be done. Emily picked greens from her own hillside and wove them into wreaths for the windows, and made a decoration for the table of hemlock boughs and pine cones. She had long since baked her fruit cake. Now she baked Christmas cookies, and a mince pie, too, for although they always went to Aunt Sophie's for dinner, she liked to have a mince pie in the house. She had bought gifts for Aunt Sophie, Uncle Chester, and Annette, and a copy of Herndon's Lincoln for her grandfather. Library copies were all very well, but when you loved a book as much as he loved that one, you ought to own it. She was working slippers for him, too. He had taken cold and sat at the big window in the dining room with a shawl over his shoulders. He wasn't allowed to go out, but he sent Judge Hodges on a mysterious errand which meant, Emily knew, presents for herself. And shortly before Christmas he said, Emmy, I want you to do some shopping for me. Of course, Grandpa. What is it? I want you to take some money out of the bank and buy skates for Khalil and Yusuf. Grandpa, what a nice idea. Buy good ones, he adjured her. There's nothing worse than a poor pair of skates. I certainly will, said Emily, and I'll buy presents for them, too. She would also, she thought, buy a doll for Layla. She felt a little ashamed that her grandfather had been the one to think of the Syrian children. It's because my mind's on the crowd coming, she thought. That great event was expanding in her thoughts like a soap bubble, and was just as iridescent. They would be home for 2 weeks and a half. 2 whole weeks and a half, Emily exclaimed often. Although she had lost some of her dependence on the crowd, she longed for them even more than she had at Thanksgiving. For this return would have a peculiar quality, she felt. During this vacation, she might cease to be an outsider in man and girl affairs. She might really come to belong. She had changed. It wasn't just that she had put her hair up and bought some pretty clothes. She was growing up, just as they were. She was changing inside. For the first time, she felt herself their equal. I wish, she thought more than once, glancing at the new white and blue dress hanging in her closet, I wish I would be invited to the New Year's Eve dance. That was held every year at the Melbourne Hotel and was the climax of the holiday season. She counted the days of that last week. Before it ended, Hunter and Ellen had arrived. Mabel, rumor said, would be on the train with the university group when it came in Friday night. She was. Hunter and Ellen and Emily, waiting with the parents on the platform, saw her first of all when the train rolled steaming into the station. She had been standing with her wraps on since the last town, she cried to them, jumping down the steps. She was followed by them all. Don, Annette, Jim Baxter, Fred, Nell, Gladys, and college students from other classes, but they didn't count. There was a melee of bags and satchels, willow plumes and new fur caps, Christmas bundles, flung arms, and cries of rejoicing. The homecoming freshmen gathered in a yelling circle. Cheer, cheer, the gang's all here, they sang, revolving, their arms on one another's shoulders. They opened the circle to let Emily in. She sang with them, blurry-eyed.